Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. Today I'm joined by a special guest, Joan Posivy, a seasoned entrepreneur known for transforming side hustles into successful business ventures. Starting her career as a banker, Joan became the youngest bank manager at a Canadian financial institution, but soon shifted her focus to entrepreneurship. Joan's first side hustle was a profitable Christmas tree lot, and she continued by revitalizing a failing delicatessen into a thriving business. Joan eventually left banking to pursue entrepreneurship full-time. Author of the best-selling book, The Way Success Works, and host of the podcast Side Hustle Hero, let's welcome Joan to the Agent of Wealth.
Thank you so much, Marc. Glad to be here.
As I mentioned in your bio, your initial side hustle was, and an introduction to entrepreneurship, was running a Christmas tree lot. What drew you to that particular idea, and were you looking for at that time something that you could get started with minimal costs?
There were many aspects of that venture that I was really attracted to. So I've always had a few dollars in my pocket, Marc, because to me, that spelt freedom. Now, my parents might have had a different idea than me, but literally I had a paper route when I was 10 years old. I was working in a part-time convenience store at 13, that sort of thing. But this was my first larger side hustle. And how it came about was my business partner at the time and now used to work at this particular garden center when he was about 16 years old. And it was in quite an affluent neighborhood. You know, you've heard that term, location. Well, this was perfect for that. And they had a big old parking lot. And it came to our attention that it was available to do these Christmas tree lot sales. And really, Marc, it was a huge leap of faith because I remember back then, and this is going back more decades than I want to count, the cost of those trees were 10 grand. And you order them in the fall, usually about October, because then the trees are shipped and packaged and shipped down to at the time, which was Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And you know that your inventory is going to be worth zero December 26th. And when the trees are delivered in the beginning of December, I believe is when we got them, end of November, at least back then, people were not buying Christmas trees. So you're standing in this frozen Christmas tree lot looking around at all this inventory and like very little customers, and you're thinking, seriously, was this a wise idea or not? But then, of course, you know, a week before Christmas, everything goes crazy and it's all sales. And it's all cash sales, and it was fun. I did that several years, actually. And I liked the short-term nature of it. It wasn't something that I was doing year-round. It was just for this season.
Yeah, so I guess that is like a seasonal one. So I imagine, even though, let's say it was November to December, were you also working a job or a full-time job at that time?
Yes, that was back in my banking career days. And so that was not money that was saved up, that 10 grand. That was pretty much a loan, which added another layer of risk to it. But because of me being familiar with the financial industry, I was able to talk them into it.
So I guess when it comes to a side hustle, right, we're just talking about the money or the startup cost, but also there's a time aspect to it. And like you said, you were working at the time. Before you even agreed to do it, did you think about what's the time commitment that this is going to take, and how am I going to balance this with everything else I have going on, including my banking job at the time?
Yeah. And those are great questions for any side hustle, especially for those getting into a side hustle where it's a year-round commitment, which most of them are. In this particular one, because it was such a short-term nature, it wasn't too much of a stretch. And a lot of times people were shopping for Christmas trees in the evenings and on the weekends, and those were outside of my 9 to 5 hours in banking, so that was fine. And I honestly don't mind going 7 days a week full on if it's for something short-term, because I know that, okay, the end of December, for example, I can take some serious time off. So I don't mind putting in the overtime hours when I know it's a short time nature like that. I certainly would not recommend doing that year-round, but for short-term nature, sure.
The other thing I think I like that you mentioned about it was that December 26th, your inventory is worth nothing. So you really have no choice. This is my inventory, and I have to sell it. Otherwise, I'm going to probably fail at this. How should someone kind of approach that aspect of it? Do you think that actually motivated you to be successful with it, or was that kind of just something on the side that you didn't really think about, but it just happened that your inventory wouldn't be worth anything if you didn't sell it by the end of Christmas season?
The Christmas tree thing is a little bit different because you know that there's going to be this huge ramp up in sales towards the last week in December. But still in the back of your mind, it's thinking, okay, what kind of deals can I start doing to get these off the lot? But in talking to people that have side hustles, like a lot of my guests, particularly when it comes to something along the food lines, they'll test them out or start out at farmers markets. And in those cases, it tends to be year-round, depending on in one's climate. So there's things that you can do as far as, packaging and merchandising to start selling off things that aren't selling as well. So, for example, roadside peach stands was a very popular side hustle guest that I had on. And if she was having some remaining or some were, starting to turn, she would bundle them basically and package them really nicely and sell them off specifically for canning. So they're a little bit lower price, but larger quantity, but it's better to get a few bucks for it than nothing at all.
Do you see more people successful with having the side hustle while they're still working their job, but in their mind, they might have that thought, well, if the side hustle doesn't work, I can always go back to my full-time job. Or the person that says, you know what, I'm going all in, I'm quitting my full-time job, and I'm going to start this from scratch with maybe the mentality that I can't fail because I don't have a job to go back to.
I would say a little bit of that would be personality, but overwhelmingly it would be more on skewing on the keep your full-time job with the benefits, with the steady paycheck while you ramp up this side hustle. Because there's going to be so many unknowns for you, and you can, and ideally should paint this, beautiful picture of what your side hustle is going to look like 10 years from now, 5 years from now. But the reality is between now and then, there's a lot of work and there's going to be a lot of surprises. And you can make the right choices for the side hustle. If you know that there is that steady paycheck coming in from the 9 to 5 that you can rely on, you can spend a longer time at the side hustle building it up and making what you deem to be the wisest choices without having that pressure of, oh my God, where the rent and the grocery bill is going to come from for next week. Because that's going to add on a real extra layer of worry and anxiety if that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I could see that. You mentioned you did the Christmas tree lot for a couple of years. Did you was that the only side hustle you did at the time?
At the time, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I see people who kind of their minds are all over the place. They're not just thinking of one side hustle. They're thinking of multiple side hustles. What has your experience been? Has it been focus on this one side hustle or throw a lot of side hustles up against the wall and see which one sticks, and that's the one eventually that you should put more of your time into?
What I've found, in one side hustle hero just popped into mind. I remember him saying that, because we were talking about shiny object syndrome, being that we're starting this one side hustle and we've got the best intentions starting out, but then as time goes on, we're not seeing the results, and then we get discouraged and run into roadblocks and maybe things that we have to do that we haven't figured out a way to do it. And then suddenly we see this YouTube video, this TikTok video of this other side hustle. And I go, oh, wow, that looks way easier. Maybe I should try that. And we go running over to that. And he said, Joan, I can't tell you the number of side hustles I tried. And he said, and honestly, if I had given any one of them enough chance to succeed, I bet you any one of them would indeed have succeeded. That, I think, is one of the top reasons that side hustles fail, is people don't give it enough runway to succeed. Because it's been said, and I've seen this through experience, is that we can overestimate how much we can accomplish in a year, but underestimate how much we can achieve in 5 years. But we need to stick with it. Having said that, there are people who like the variety and purposely stack on several side hustles. Now, I think this is the exception, not the rule, but I had one woman on. She stacks no less than 6 side hustles. But they interact really well, like she does dog sitting, for example. And her main side hustle, though, is teaching piano. So she'll be over there and give the piano lessons, and then that child and the parents go away for the weekend, and she's babysitting the dog, or dog sitting. And meanwhile, she's also doing their gardening as well. And she's got a YouTube channel, so she's on the computer. So, I mean, she's got that mapped out. But for most people, that's not the case. But that is a possibility for those people that like a lot of variety.
So the lead generation kind of all circles around and flows into each other with
yes.
that.
Well, that's exactly how it happened, because she was over there dog sitting, and she looked out the window and she said, you know, those beds could really use some work. And she actually did one of the flower beds just as a freebie, just to show. Of course, that's, you know, her marketing piece. And they're like, oh, yeah, please do the rest.
Yeah. I think like you mentioned with the side hustle hero who was doing one thing and kind of got a little discouraged and found a TikTok. I see that a lot where people, it seems like people a lot want this like instant gratification or instant, you know, success, when in reality, if it was easy and if everyone would be doing it if that was the case. But I imagine at some point you have to make that decision and say, all right, this is not working. I'm going to move on to something else.
Yep, and there's nothing wrong with that, because you've had that experience all along the way. I find that we have in life our successes and we have our learning experiences. Whatever transpired during that first side hustle you had, you learned from it, what worked, what didn't work. And sometimes, too, you learn about yourself in terms of what you like and what you don't like. Like my business partner, for example, is definitely an outdoors, hands-on. You could not give him an office job. That's like oil and water. Similarly, somebody is way more happier. Just go away, give me the objectives. I'm going to sit here on the computer and do my thing, and I don't want to interact with people as little as possible. So it's know thyself.
Yeah. Are there trends around side hustles? Like, are there trends around these are the popular ones that people are doing at a particular time?
Well, certainly anything AI right now is really trendy. But if a person is getting into a side hustle to earn more money, which I would say that's the majority of people. I mean, sometimes it's to test a business idea that they eventually want to take full-time, or maybe it is to gain more credibility in their industry, but generally it's for that extra funds for the trip or for the groceries or education, whatever the motivation may be. As far as trends, though, what I find the most profitable sometimes are those ones that fly under the radar. For example, cleaning up trash in industrial areas. So the startup cost is, under $100. And basically, you're hired by the building owners or the property managers in some of these industrial areas to basically, you're getting paid to go for a walk. And you get there early morning and you pick up trash. That's definitely not sexy, but it's definitely something that I would look into if I were starting over again. Lemonade stand. Had one of my guests on. He is making a killing. When you think of the cost of lemonade stand, and his was, that's one of the ones that he wanted to add on. His main one, though, is caramel corn, popcorn. He just does it once a week. His full-time job is in construction. This is a side hustle. And you can imagine what the cost of that product is. It's like pennies for the bag. And he's selling it for like $8, and he's paying somebody $100 cash to work there for the day. I mean, it's incredible when you do the numbers and you see the traffic in some of these farmers markets, because that's where he works out of, because he's not paying for that larger bricks and mortar lease where you're locked in for 3 to 5 years. This is a weekly market. And a lot of the markets are pretty good about having not too much competition in a certain area because they want the vendors to succeed. But it's also a great place to test out a market. So I think the things that fly under the radar are real key. And I'll put this out to your listeners as a fun exercise the next time they are out at a farmer's market. or in a pop-up shop, and just take a look at the traffic. So after my conversation with this guy, Jonathan Schuett was his name, I'm a big fan of farmers markets. I do most of my shopping there. So I'm standing there the following weekend, and I'm waiting in line at my pasta vendor, and I'm looking at the stall next to me, and they're selling bread. And I'm just doing a quick count of the loaves and like a guesstimate at the product costs, and I'm like, they're going to gross around $2,000 today. That's not bad. But you don't think of it if you're the customer and you're just going to buy that loaf of bread or that popcorn. One more thing about Jonathan's experience. And this gets back to something I mentioned earlier, I believe, about the cost of the product. That is so key. Because I asked him, I said, the vendors that show up and don't make it, what are they doing wrong? And he said, one of the things is this cost of the product. He said there was this guy in there selling steak sandwiches. He said they were really good sandwiches, but the price point was very similar to what he was selling as popcorn. So who was making more money? Like that piece of meat, that steak was expensive, whereas Jonathan was, like I said, it was less than $1 as pennies. I had a soap maker on, and her full-time job was an accountant, and she joked that a lot of creative people don't pay attention to the nuts and bolts, the financials, like someone like yourself, Mark, would in the finance industry. And she joked that she was one of the few soap makers that she knew who actually knew the cost of a bar of soap. That's so key, because I had someone else on probably about 6 months ago, and she was selling clothes, and her sales were pushing $1 million gross revenue, but I really didn't get a feel that she had a real handle on her cost of goods, and I wouldn't be surprised if she was earning very little. So when people say, oh, this is a 6-figure business and I'm doing 8 figures in revenue, okay, well, that's fine, but like how much you actually earning? You need to know those numbers.
Yeah, that happens a lot with entrepreneurship, where the business owner gets into being an entrepreneur because they want to be an entrepreneur. They want to, for some business need, but they don't realize you are running a business and you need to know a lot of things about the business to be, to have a better chance of being successful. Some of the examples that you went over, you call minimal cost to start up. But what about, let's say, a more expensive side hustle that someone is trying? Is there a market? Can someone get a loan for, I know you can maybe borrow from friends or family, but can you go to a bank, or is there some kind of government program where you can go to obtain some funding for a side hustle idea that you have?
Government funding, I'm not sure, because quite honestly, Mark, I have a global audience, so I don't drill down on one country. Certainly I could speak to Canada, and there are government programs out there, but I've always leaned on the private sector myself, because it's been my experience. A lot of the government programs, being an entrepreneur, I want to have less to do with all the bureaucracy and the red tape. I just want to go out there and do the thing that I'm doing. So personally, I've shied away from that. But I mean, certainly if there's grants, and certainly through our system, there is like entrepreneurial courses and guidance people can get, because I've actually been paid to teach at those years ago when I was doing that. Some things you can lease, so the startup costs are fairly low. Like, for example, I had a vending machine person on recently that I found actually quite fascinating, because we were talking about, I mentioned AI, AI incorporated into the vending machines. So imagine the traditional vending machine, you put in your coins and out drops whatever, your pop or your chips. But now with these AI enhanced ones, you scan your credit card and you open the door almost like a cooler. So now you're just choosing things off the shelf. And he said when he started converting his machines, his sales went way up. And his theory is because it's way more convenient for people now. So with the AI powered ones, you open the door and you just grab what you want and it reads what you've taken. There's cameras and sensors there. And then it just charges your credit card. It's very quick for you as the purchaser, as opposed to the old machine where the pop would drop out. Then you'd have to put in more money and then put in another code and then get your second item. See what I mean? It's much more time consuming, even if you weren't using coins, even if you were using a cart. But my point in bringing him up is he was saying that the cost to basically get involved in that was about $700 because the vending machine people were anxious to get you to lease their vending machines. So really it was the first payment, getting the vending machine there and getting it set up. So that included the first bunch of inventory as well.
Yeah, I could see that being useful. You wouldn't think AI would get into vending machines, but I guess it's getting into everywhere. You know, we talked a little bit about going from full-time job to side hustle becoming full-time. Are there certain side hustles that lend itself to transforming into a full-time job versus, like, for example, you know, you brought up the lemonade stand. Can I quit my full-time job and turn the lemonade stand into a full-time career? Maybe, maybe not. Do you think people should go into their side hustle if their goal is to actually transform it into a full-time job? Should that be part of their thought process from the start?
If they want to eventually leave their full-time job, then yes, I would definitely take a look at what is it that has the potential for me to be scalable enough for me to make it worthwhile to do this full-time. And that would be part of my, what I would call like a 10-year vision. Like 10 years from now, ideally, what would I like this side hustle to look like? And if you're painting that picture and you are indeed doing that now full-time, then what are the components of that? What does that look like? What are the income sources that are going to be supporting that to replace your income? And then you slowly work that back to, all right, what would I have to achieve in 5 years? What would I have to achieve in a year? What do I have to achieve this quarter? I always tell people to treat your side hustle. I don't care if it's something that it's always going to be a side hustle or it's going to go into full-time, but always treat it like a business. So what are your objectives for this quarter? And then specifically today, what is it that you are doing to move the needle for the success of that side hustle? So you're bringing that 10-year vision right down to today. What are you doing towards it? It's just going to be a tiny piece, but it's a little bit of a step. And you've got to get it on your calendar or you're never going to get there. Because let's face it, Mark, you and I bet you everybody listening, our days are full just with living life. Business, family, social life. Suddenly you say, oh, I'm going to start this side hustle. Well, you got to trade it off somewhere. Something, and I think of it as a trade. You're not losing. It's not like you're sacrificing something. You're doing the side hustle, presumably, because you're excited about the idea of creating additional income for whatever purposes that you want to put that towards.
What are some, and just in general in starting a side hustle, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making?
That first one we've already talked about, and that's people not giving it enough time. Thinking, well, I saw on TikTok that this is only going to take me like 3 weeks and then I can retire on my sailboat. Ain't going to work like that, right? It's always going to take longer because there's so many learning curves to it. Like initially when I launched Side Hustle Hero, I was going to do it both audio and video. I had no idea, number one, how much of a learning curve there was in putting together a podcast. And then secondly, to think that I would be doing video right away as well. There were just like so many other moving parts. And I'll skip the whole backstory about my green screen and almost setting the place on fire. But suffice it to say, no more green screen. And I originally ended up releasing just audio, because I thought, if I'm going to try to get all this done ahead of time, I'm never going to launch this thing. And that's the other thing. People just have to start, get out there and do it. So not giving it enough time. And secondly, and we just started to touch on this, was the time management piece. Knowing that it is going to take some time. So what are you going to carve out? What are you going to trade? There was a book that just came to mind. I never read it, but I love the title. And this is right up your alley, Mark. It was called The Latte Factor. And basically the premise was that if instead of spending the $5 or $10 now on a latte, put it towards basically your retirement fund. I used to teach a course called Winning the Money Game. And using that as an example, I would say, you've got these goals to be financially free in the future. Instead of buying that latte or whatever it is for you, how about putting that into your financial freedom fund? You'll get there sooner. So it's a choice. It's a trade. Now, some days you'll definitely want to go in there and get the double espresso, never mind the latte. But in most cases, you'll make the conscious choice of putting it in that financial freedom fund and seeing excited by the growth of that. So again, it's a choice, and it's the same with the time management. And keep in mind too, if you are living with a person or people, they're going to have to adjust as well. So if you've decided that on a particular evening you're going to devote 2 hours to your side hustle instead of, say, watching TV with a friend or family member, then they're going to need a bit of coaching around this as well. And I'd say lastly, as far as why side hustles fail, you may have a product or service that you really love, but you need to be aware, is there a market for it? Are there people out there that actually want it, need it? Or is there a product or service out there already, but it's so oversaturated, you're going to need to come in from a very unique perspective in order to bust through that market?
Do you see more successes with people going into a side hustle by themselves or with a partner, whether that partner is just a friend, family member, or some unrelated person that they have this idea with?
That one's a tricky one because I could argue both sides of it, Mark. So many people have said, do this on your own because then you got to call the shots 100% yourself. But I've had a business partner going on 42 years now. And so we work really well together. And he'll push me when I need to be pushed and vice versa. And I found that invaluable. But what I can say, if you are going this alone, with the podcast, this is pretty much 100% my baby. And for any solopreneurs, you really need to have people around you that are supportive and helpful, whether that's a community of aspiring entrepreneurs or at least like-minded that can capture the vision of what you want to do with your life. Because as you move forward and increase your success, there may be some people in your circle that are envious or resentful of that and then try to pull you back to where they are, and that could be very detrimental for you. So you want to have people around there that can appreciate where you're going, where you're heading. And there's so many community kind of membership groups out there for either your industry or for entrepreneurial in general to give you that support, so that suddenly it's like you found your people. There are other people aspiring to be better and do better than they have in the past, that they really want to build and do something with their life. So get with those people.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, all right, Joan, that's all the questions I have for you today. I want to thank you for joining me on today's episode. Before we go, how best can listeners reach out to you and find a copy of your book?
Pretty much everything lives at sidehustlehero.com. That's the website, and there's links to the podcast, Side Hustle Hero podcast, and the book, The Way Success Works.
Great. We'll link to that in the resources section of the show notes. Thanks again, Joan, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Don't forget to follow The Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.